Motherhood is something where love begins and the love ends, as said by Robert Browning. However, we all know that human reproduction is highly dependent on age, and fertility decreases with advancing age, and the chances of miscarriages increase with age. As you can see, the Ishire Capri Workshop Group in 2005 came up with this paper, and it said that the chances of conception per thousand was around 400 to 550 when the age was around 21 to 25, and it decreased over a period of time. By the time you reach the age of 46 to 50, the chances of conception are around 0 to 100 per thousand women. So we definitely know that age has got a role to play in decreasing the chances of reproduction, and also the chances of ART success. Now, this was a very beautiful paper which is published by Sandro Astius in 2019, and here he says that the probability of blastocyst, normal euploid blastocyst formation per M2 oocyte which is retrieved, decreases as your age advances. So at 26, it was around zero point 0.7 to zero point 0.8 per M2 oocyte, which came down to around 0.1 by the time the woman reaches the age of 44. In other words, what he meant was that as the age advances, the number of oocytes which are required to get one normal, morphologically normal blastocyst keeps on increasing. And what happens with age to the ovarian reserve is exactly the opposite, that it is decreasing day by day. Let's understand this concept. Why this happens is that when you have got a very large pool of oocytes, the number of good oocytes and the number of bad oocytes are more or less the same. Therefore, whenever the selection takes place, almost all the good quality oocytes are selected, and therefore all the embryos which are developed when the ovarian pool is good are all of good quality. But as your pool of oocytes decrease, what happens is the ratio of good to bad oocytes change, and therefore a poor quality. Still, you have the FSH and LH which is secreted by the brain, and therefore the selection of the oocytes continue. But what happens in this is, instead of all the good quality oocytes getting selected, there are less good quality oocytes which get selected, and poor quality oocytes also get selected. Therefore, the viability change as the number of oocytes decrease from 100%. You can see it reduces to 67% when the pool decreases. Now, as the pool keeps on decreasing, the chances of getting good quality oocytes decrease, while at the same time poor quality oocytes are the more and more which get recruited, and therefore the quality of oocyte gets decreased, leading to a poor quality embryo, leading to decrease in the success of ART. Now, this is a very good concept to understand. So, friends, as I said, it's not only the number of oocytes which decrease with aging, but it is also, there is a reduction in the oocyte competence to develop into a morphologically normal embryo. Now, why this decrease in the competence of the oocyte to produce a morphologically normal embryo is because of certain other things. Let's understand what those things are. We must understand that it's the oocyte which sustains the embryo development till the embryonic genome is activated, and therefore the quality of the oocyte has to be good if the development of the embryo has to be sustained till the embryonic genome is activated. Now, what happens with age? Let's see. There is mitochondrial dysfunction in the oocyte. Now, mitochondria is the most numerous organelle which is found in the oocyte. It is the powerhouse of the oocyte. In fact, sperm does not provide any mitochondria to the offspring. So all the energy which is needed for the development of the embryo comes from the oocyte. And therefore, if there is a mitochondrial dysfunction in the form of there is a mitochondrial swelling, or if there is a vacuolization, or there is mitochondrial DNA errors and deletions, it may lead to decrease in the mitochondrial function, leading to decrease in the energy production which is needed for the embryo to survive, leading to a bad quality embryo or poor quality embryo. There is also shortening of telomeres. Now, what are telomeres? These are nothing but short tandem repeats of specialized DNA sequences that protect the ends of the chromosomes. Thereby, they prevent the non-disjunction of the chromosomes. So, advanced maternal age leads to shortening of these telomeres, and that leads to non-disjunction. Then that leads to cytoplasmic immaturity, leading to fragmented embryos and aneuploid embryos. There is something called as cohesion dysfunction. Now, cohesion is needed to hold the sister chromatids together. Now, what are sister chromatids? Now, when there is a replication of the cell, the DNA has to get replicated or duplicated because it has to be shared with the daughter cell. So the copy of that chromosome which is there is called as a sister chromatid. Now these two copies which are exactly similar to each other, they should be together, and that is they are held together by this cohesion. Now loss of cohesion leads to premature separation of the sister chromatids. Normally what we know is that all the primordial follicles are arrested in the prophase of the meiosis 1. Now, when this prophase reaches the stage of anaphase, that's the time when the sister chromatids should get separated. However, if there is a problem with the cohesion, then it leads to premature separation of the chromatids, leading to abnormality in the oocyte and abnormality in the embryo. So that is regarding the cohesion dysfunction. It's not only seen in meiosis 1, but it's also seen in meiosis 2. So then there is something called as spindle instability. Now we all know that spindle is responsible for the separation of both homologous chromosomes as well as sister chromatids. Now the instability in this spindle may lead to improper segregation of these chromosomes or the chromatids, leading to aneuploidy. Now again, the spindle instability is seen in meiosis 1 as well as in meiosis 2. So at both the stages, if there is an instability in the spindle, that will lead to chromosomal missegregation, leading to an aneuploidy. So there is mitochondrial dysfunction, there is spindle instability, there is shortening of the telomeres. So these are, and the cohesion dysfunction. These are the problems which are associated with the oocyte as the maternal age advances, leading to increased aneuploidy. So why this aneuploidy could be there with increased age? The concept which we need to understand it's maybe that the oocytes or the primordial follicles are lying in the dormant stage or an arrested stage for a long period of time as the age of the patient advances. Therefore, because it's lying there, it gets exposed to all the environmental factors. It could lead to epigenetic changes, and this can lead to all the problems in the oocyte in an advanced maternal age. Friends, there are two concepts which we need to understand. The first concept is that whether we believe that all the primordial follicles are abnormal as the as the age advances, or they are normal. If we consider that all the primordial follicles which are there are normal, then we can think of giving some adjuvants, to change the outcome of our ART. But if we believe, or if we assume that all the patients have got poor quality primordial follicles, then whatever we do, it's going to lead to a defective oocyte and is going to lead to a defective embryo. Therefore, what we have in mind at present is that we are assuming that all the primordial follicles or the follicles which are in the different developmental stages are not bad. So we can change the outcome by giving some adjuvants. Friends, as Betty Friedman said, aging is not lost youth, but a new stage of opportunity and strength. So here we are. We have got a woman with advanced age, but then we still want to do something for her so that we can improve the chances of her conception through ART. This is a rather very breezy slide. I wanted this slide to be seen by all of you, is just to understand what kind of adjustments and adjuvants and different add-ons have been tried till today. So there are lots of things which have been tried in the past and which are being tried even today to improve the chances of conception through ART in women of advanced maternal age. We call these women as women with poor ovarian response. Now, how do we define a poor ovarian responder? For that, most of us are using what is called as a Bologna criteria. Now, Bologna criteria is what you need to have at least 2 of the 3. Age has to be more than 40 years. there has to be a previous poor ovarian response to conventional stimulation, wherein we have got less than 3 oocytes retrieved, or the cycle has been cancelled on 2 occasions, or the ovarian reserve testing has suggested us that she may have a poor ovarian response in the form of antral follicle count, which is less than 5 oocytes per ovary on ultrasound, or the AMH is less than 1.5 nanograms per ml. But friends, when we are implementing this Bologna criteria, you see that there is a lots of heterogeneity which we are looking at. For example, if a woman is young, that means she is less than 40 years of age, and her ovarian reserve testing is showing that she has got a normal ovarian reserve, but still she has got a response which is poor in the past. Where do I classify her? Should I classify her as a one with poor ovarian response or not? Well, if I stick to Bologna criteria, she may not be a poor ovarian responder. Now that is the reason why they have come up with a new concept called as Poseidon criteria, which is called as patient-oriented strategies encompassing individualized oocyte number. It was proposed by a group of researchers led by Peter Umedan, Sandro Asti, Carlo Alvigi, and so on. So what they have done is they have divided these patients into 4 categories. Group 1 and Group 2 are the patients in whom we were expecting a normal ovarian response, but we got a suboptimal ovarian response. While in Group 3 and Group 4, we already knew that these are likely to give us a poor response, and they gave us a poor response. Group 1, wherein the patient was less than 35 of age, and Group 2 was more than 35 of age. Similarly, in Group 3 and Group 4, Group 3 was less than 35 years, and Group 4, it was more than 35 years. Now, this is the latest of all which has been put forth for classifying poor ovarian reserve, and I feel that most of us should now start using this for classifying our poor ovarian reserves patients, because this has got less heterogeneity as compared to Bologna criteria, and therefore with this we can come up with better results, and we come up with better trials for different adjuvants. I am going to restrict my talk today to androgen modulating agents like DHEA, androgens like testosterone, growth hormone, and at the end I am going to talk a little bit about cryopreservation. Now, if I have to understand why androgens or modulating agents like DHEA or testosterone will help me in improving my ART success, I should understand what is the role of androgens in folliculogenesis. Now, to understand that, I should know something about folliculogenesis. It all begins with the primordial follicles, where when the primordial follicles initiate their development from primordial follicles to the primary follicles. Now, when I do that, that's the first recruitment. Then from primary to secondary to preantral, this is another development which happens. So till the second recruitment, the entire development is gonadotropin independent. Now from preantral to antral is the conversion or transition, which is called as the second recruitment. This is gonadotropin sensitive. And then finally, last 14 days of the development of the follicles is dependent completely. Majority of the part of it is gonadotropin independent, some part of it is gonadotropin sensitive, and some of it is gonadotropin dependent. So what is the role of androgen in this? Now, most of the studies which have done on the role of androgen in folliculogenesis are animal studies. It is proposed that it may play a role during initial recruitment, that is from primordial to primary transition, or during the second recruitment, that is from preantral to antral stage. Androgens influence the early stages of follicular development in mice as quoted by Yang et al. In 2010, and it is also influencing the early stage in primates, as said by Vendola et al. In 1999. Therefore, what it does, it stimulates the primordial follicle initiation and development into a primary follicle. Therefore, this is the stage wherein if we can help the patient, the number of follicles which are available for the second recruitment, and finally the outcome of the total number of oocytes will increase if androgen helps in this transition from primordial to primary follicles. Now, how does androgens act? The androgens act through the androgen receptors. These androgen receptors are present in the cytoplasm. After they get attached to the androgen, they are translocated in the nucleus, and then the rest of the its effects are through the nucleus. Secondly, it acts as a substrate for the estrogen synthesis in the granulosa cells. Now, when it is acting through the androgen receptor, it could be through the genomic pathway or through the non-genomic pathway. Genomic pathway is when it gets attached to the androgen receptors within the cytoplasm or the nucleus. It's through the non-genomic pathway when it gets attached to a surface receptor, and then it causes further actions. So that is the non-genomic pathway. It's also seen that the androgen receptors are in the maximum number during the pre-antral and the early antral stage, and therefore it is found that androgens may help for the transition from pre-antral follicle to the early antral follicle, helping the second recruitment of folliculogenesis. So, in nutshell, what are the actions of androgens in folliculogenesis? It stimulates the initiation of primordial follicle development. So the first recruitment is helped with by androgen. In pre-antral follicles, it increases the proliferation of granulosa cells. It also increases the expression of FSH receptors in the granulosa cells. Thus, increased FSH action on the pre-antral follicles, leading to increased secondary recruitment. Androgens also stimulate GDF9, that is growth differentiating factor 9. It's an oocyte factor which is responsible for the follicular growth, and that helps to promote pre-antral to antral transition. And it also enhances the IGF-1 and IGF-1 receptor mRNA. Now, IGF-1 and IGF-2 are required or necessary for the cytoplasmic maturation of the oocyte. But then, is really androgen or hypoandrogenism is the cause of delayed response or diminished response in women, in such women? Norbert Glischer published this paper in 2013, and you can clearly see here that the controls, as compared to the controls, the patients who had premature ovarian aging and the patients who had physiologic diminished ovarian reserve, these are the ones who are of advanced maternal age. These are the ones probably who are younger, but they have not shown the response which they should have actually shown. So that is why they are called as premature ovarian aging. Both of them have shown less or low total testosterone as compared to controls. And therefore, yes, supplementing these women with androgens may help to improve the outcome of success. It all started with this paper which was published in 2000 by Casson, wherein 5 women with previous poor ovarian response were given DHEA for 2 months. And it showed improvement in the responsiveness of the follicles to gonadotropins and also increased the E2 levels. This is how DHEA came into picture. Before that, DHEA was used or is used today as an anti-aging agent and improving the sexual dysfunction. But this was the paper which initiated its use in infertility and improving the success of ART. Norbert Glischer and David Berard, this is a group which has done maximum work with DHEA. They came up with their first paper in 2005, which said that a 43-year-old woman was given DHEA for 9 months, and then she was stimulated in subsequent months after 3 months of DHEA. And what you see here is, with subsequent cycles, the number of oocytes retrieved were increased, and the number of embryos also increased, so as by the end of 9 months, the number of oocytes which were retrieved reached 18. and the embryos which were developed was around 13.5. Phenomenal response. And that is how then they continued with their studies, and they published quite a few papers between 2005 and 2010 saying that DHEA supplementation in women who have poor ovarian response or diminished ovarian response increases the number of M2 oocytes, increases the clinical pregnancy rate, and increases the live birth rate. Then came a meta-analysis in 2011 by Seshkamal Sankara, and she said 9 studies were analyzed, out of which 5 were RCTs and 4 were controlled studies. And she said there is an insufficient evidence to support addition of androgens. Now here we were, 5 years, continuously, all the papers telling us that yes, it helps, it helps, it helps. And suddenly now she comes up with this meta-analysis which says there is insufficient evidence to support the addition of androgen. She studied both DHEA as well as testosterone gel, transdermal. The same author again published in 2012 regarding the androgen supplementation in poor ovarian response and IVF, and she said that the available data suggest potential benefit but are not sufficiently conclusive. It needs to be supplemented for at least 3 to 4 months. So, in women who are already compromised ovarian reserve, could this delay be detrimental to their chances of success? Most studies can be challenged on the basis of clinical heterogeneity. Now, this is because the Bologna criteria itself has got heterogeneity. Therefore, when you are selecting women for studies, if you are going to apply Bologna criteria, it is bound to be heterogeneity. The heterogeneity is going to be more. All the individual studies are underpowered and the quality of the trial is poor. That's what she said when she came up with this paper in 2012. 2015, Cochrane data analysis on androgens, that is again DHEA or testosterone in women with undergoing for women undergoing assisted reproduction, also said that evidence is insufficient to recommend use of DHEA or testosterone to improve the success in IVF. Recently, in 2016, again, Dr. Zhang published this meta-analysis and systemic review, the largest meta-analysis to be published till date, with 21 trials included in it, out of which some of them were randomized control trials and some of them had a self-control group. And both of them showed that the clinical pregnancy rate was significantly more or better in women who were supplemented with DHEA as compared to those who were not supplemented with DHEA. This is the latest 2016 trial. Another meta-analysis and systemic review was published by Johan Schwarz in 2018. However, the number of trials which were included in this were small. Only 5 of them were included. 2 were RCTs, 2 prospectives, and 1 retrospective. But they also concluded that DHEA improves the clinical pregnancy rate per initiated cycle with use of DHEA. This was a RCT which was published in again 2019, the latest, by Chen. And here you can see the number of retried oocytes are significantly more in DHEA group. Metaphase 2 oocytes are significantly more in DHEA group. Top quality embryos. Cumulative pregnancy rate was significantly more in DHEA group, and live birth rate was also significantly more in DHEA group. In 2019, another meta-analysis which was published by Lin Zhu, it also said that number of oocytes, the clinical pregnancy rate, and outcome of live birth rate all are significantly better with DHEA supplementation. Almost 190 women were analyzed in the meta-analysis. But still, most of the studies are underpowered. Therefore, we are looking forward to 2 trials which are still underway, and we would like to wait for their outcomes to be published. One of them is by Jay Prakasan. This is a pilot study wherein they have recruited 60 women. All of them have aged ovaries, and they are going to try DHEA in these patients. Again, they haven't come up with the final verdict of it. And the second trial is by Wang Now it started in 2015. It's not yet published, but almost 270 to 300 women are to be randomized, 270 for DHEA arm and 270 for placebo arm. So this is going to be the largest randomized control trial till date to be published on the use of DHEA, but we need to wait for some more time for the results of these trials to come up. What is the dosage of DHEA? It all started with Kassan giving 80 milligrams, probably because it was available in that dosage, and so it started with that. Then it came down to 75. Most of the studies which we have seen up till now is used 75 milligrams per day in divided doses. Then came 75 milligrams SR preparations which are available in India. But there are no trials which have used these SR preparations worldwide. Therefore, even if we are using it today, I didn't find any trial which used this SR preparations for the duration is up to 4 months. The overall side effects are low. Let's come to the transdermal testosterone gel. In 2009, Fabregas came up with this randomized clinical trial, the first one to be published on transdermal testosterone. 31 patients in testosterone group and 31 patients in control group were analyzed. 2.5 milligrams of testosterone was given per day for 5 days preceding the gonadotropin. So 5 days of testosterone followed by the controlled ovarian stimulation and then pickup. The number of pregnancies were more in the testosterone group, but it did not reach a statistical significance. Then came the largest study on transdermal testosterone in 2011 by Kim. 55 patients were randomized in each group, and the primary endpoint was mature oocytes. And you can see here the number of oocytes retrieved were statistically significant in TTG group. Even the clinical pregnancy rate and the live birth rate was statistically significantly more or better in the TTG group as compared to the control group. Then came the meta-analysis by in 2012. Only 3 studies were included. They also showed that testosterone improves the chances of live birth rate and clinical pregnancy rate in women with poor ovarian responders. This was a trial which was published in 2016, a randomized clinical trial using transdermal testosterone. The dosage was different. He used 10 milligrams of testosterone per day for 21 days before stimulation, and long protocol was used for the controlled ovarian stimulation. The conclusion drawn was the current RCT has shown that transdermal testosterone pretreatment at the given dose and schedule did not increase the number of COCs. Then came latest 2019, a meta-analysis, 7 RCTs, largest of all. Again, all are randomized clinical trials, and the primary outcome was live birth rate. That's what we want. When we are supplementing anything for these women, the outcome has to be a live birth rate, and clinical pregnancy rate was considered as a secondary outcome. Both live birth rate as well as clinical pregnancy rate was statistically significantly more in women who were supplemented with testosterone as compared to the placebo group. What are the different protocols? There are many protocols which have been used in different studies. 1% transdermal testosterone 10 milligram per day for 21 days preceding stimulation, or 2.5 milligram of patch per day for 5 days before controlled ovarian stimulation, or 12.5 milligrams per day for 21 days preceding controlled ovarian stimulation. There is one paper which has come out with even oral dose of testosterone, 40 milligrams per day for 40 days preceding controlled ovarian stimulation. But most of them have used it in the dosage of 10 or 12.5 milligrams per day for 21 days preceding the controlled ovarian stimulation. Friends, then how am I going to choose the androgen? Should I be using DHEA? Should I be using testosterone? Because finally DHEA is an intermediate form of testosterone which has to get converted into testosterone, and then only it will act in the folliculogenesis. So rather than using DHEA, why can't I use testosterone directly? Let's go back to the paper which was published by Norbert Gleischer. Here what we saw that total testosterone was less in premature ovarian aging patients as well as physiologic diminished ovarian reserve. But when DHEAS was analyzed, it was found that in women who have got physiologic DOR, that means who are with elderly, had higher DHEAS. That means the machinery needed for the conversion of DHEA to testosterone was not available in those, and therefore cannot help, and therefore this is a growth rather than DHEA. While those who are young have shown low DHEAS levels as well as low total testosterone levels. These are the women who have got adrenal insufficiency, because DHEAS, most of the DHEAS comes from adrenals, while DHEA, 85% of them comes from adrenals, 15% of them come from ovaries. So if the patient has got premature ovarian aging, that means that she is younger but has got a poor ovarian response, and the test, it is suggestive more of adrenal insufficiency. These are the subgroup of patients in whom DHEA will help. And women with advanced maternal age who have got low testosterone but high DHEAS levels, these are the ones who have got actual ovarian insufficiency, and these are the patients who will be benefited by giving direct testosterone. Friends, we need to understand that DHEA has got very low side effects. It is excreted from almost all the body fluids. As compared to that, testosterone has got high side effects, and the levels reach above normal very fast. And therefore, when we are choosing between the two, we have to be very careful, and we have to keep this in mind. Testosterone has to be given for a shorter period of time, while DHEA, even if given for a longer period of time, is not going to help, is not going to have any problems. But at the same time, we should also think of, are we going the progesterone way just because it doesn't have side effects? Are we giving DHEA for each and every woman who shows a poor ovarian response? So my take would be, let's subcategorize these women with poor ovarian response and then use with caution whatever adjuvant we have to use. Let's come to the growth hormone part. It's been tried as an adjuvant in IVF for more than 25 years, but still, till date, there is no consensus for its beneficial effect. Should I be using it or should I not? So there is always a confusion between the two even after 25 years. What is the rationale behind using growth hormone? In the initial stages, or in the initial few years, it was assumed that growth hormone would increase the responsiveness of the follicles to gonadotropins, thus increasing the recruitment. That is how it all started. But over a period of time, we have changed our view of looking at growth hormone. Friends, oocyte is equally required or needed for the follicular genesis or development of the follicle. Oocyte deprived follicles fail to grow. The oocyte factors which are responsible for folliculogenesis are growth derived factor 9 and bone BMP15. These are the two factors derived from the oocytes which are responsible for folliculogenesis. IGF-1 and IGF-2 play a vital role in cytoplasmic maturation. Now, what growth hormone does is, it increases the levels of IGF-1 and IGF-2 and thus improves the cytoplasmic maturation. It stimulates GDF9 and BMP15 and thus increases the DNA repairing capacity. And therefore, by supplementing growth hormone, we are trying to reduce the and not trying to increase the number of follicles or number of eggs to be retrieved. That is to be kept in mind. The first meta-analysis in relation to growth hormone was by Kolibianakis in 2009. 6 RCTs were included for this meta-analysis. 89 women were randomized to growth hormone. 89 women were analyzed in growth hormone group and 80 women were in the control group. Clinical pregnancy rate was considered to be the primary outcome. This RCT said that supplementing women with growth hormone increased the clinical pregnancy rate statistically, as well as the live birth was significantly more in the growth hormone group as compared to the placebo group. This was a very classical study which was done by Tesserik Jan, published in 2005. It was specifically done in women who were more than 40 years of age. 100 women were randomized for receiving growth hormone or placebo, largest trial or study till date. And the number of M2 oocytes recovered were similar in both the groups. You see here, placebo 4.7 and growth hormone 4.6. But if you see the clinical pregnancy rate, implantation rate, delivery rate, and birth rate, all of them were statistically significantly more in growth hormone group as compared to the placebo group. That what does it mean? It means that growth hormone supplementation is not going to improve the number of oocytes which we retrieve, but the quality of the oocytes and the quality of the embryos is going to be better, and that is going to help us in improving the success. This was a very nice article which was published in 2011 by Dominic Ziegler. What he did was he subcategorized the patients with poor ovarian response and then evaluated growth hormone supplements in these women. Older ART participants, as I said, those who are more than 40 years, and we already saw it that Tesserik has already said that it improves the clinical pregnancy rate and live birth rates in women who are older. Second one was an unselected poor responders, irrespective of the age, irrespective of the reason for poor ovarian response. John Yovich, he is the one who has done maximum work in growth hormone and IVF. 232 cycles were randomized, and you can see it was a study which was done over a period of 5 years, and all of them showed better or good response to growth hormone as compared to placebo. But if you see, for those who are with poor ART performance, that means the response is good, but repeatedly we are getting poor quality embryos. There are no sufficient data to suggest the use of growth hormone in such women. That is what this paper said. Again, the same group, Yovich, came up in 2017 with the single center retrospective analysis of their 161 patients. Now the protocol was changed here. They gave 1.5 units of growth hormone per day for 6 weeks preceding the controlled ovarian stimulation cycle. Fresh embryo transfers were done, and they resulted in 21.7% CPR as compared to 10% in no growth hormone group, which was statistically significant. Even live birth rate was better with the growth hormone group. What are the different protocols which are used for growth hormone? Now, ideal protocol would be to supplement 1 unit per day for 3 to 4 months, because that is the time which is needed for a normal follicular genesis. So if we supplement growth hormone for that long, it would probably help more. But because of the constraints of the number of injections, the duration, the cost which is involved, because growth hormone is a very expensive drug, a compromise protocol was devised wherein 1 unit or 1.5 or 2 units were given per day for 6 weeks preceding the controlled ovarian stimulation. Now the paper which was published by John Yovich of unselected patients, in that he used 2 different protocols. Initially, he used 10 units on day 7, 14, 21 and day 2 of the controlled ovarian stimulation cycle. Now this was because they believed that it will improve the responsiveness to the growth hormone. But then the concept changed, and as the concept changed, because it then from the number of oocytes, it came to the cytoplasmic maturation and the DNA repairing capacity by growth hormone, they changed the protocol and they started giving 10 units on day 21 and then on day 2 onwards, alternate day till the day of HCG trigger. In all, 60 units in both the studies. We have seen different meta-analysis. We have seen different RCTs which have been published. But this is one thing which has been published in October 2019, ovarian stimulation guideline by ISHRE, or European Society of Human Reproduction. What it has to say? It has to say that, well, the evidence probably does not recommend use of DHEA or testosterone or growth hormone for poor responders. After discussing all these things for almost 45-50 minutes, then the question again comes, where do we stand then? We have got reports which say that it's good, some reports which say it's not good. Then what should I do? There is a need for a sufficiently powered randomized clinical trial with low heterogeneity for poor ovarian response. Subcategorization of this poor ovarian response, as I said, is needed. As I said, one who has got premature ovarian aging should be analyzed differently. The one who has got physiologic diminished ovarian reserve should be analyzed differently. However, we can say that DHEA would be of help in women who have got poor ovarian response with low total testosterone and low DHEAs, suggestive of probable adrenal insufficiency. Testosterone would be of help in women with poor ovarian reserve and low testosterone with high DHEAs. Conversion system is at fault. Growth hormone would be useful in elderly women. Now, since growth hormone is not going to increase the number of follicles, it should be used in women who are likely to respond to our stimulation, maybe at higher doses of stimulation, but they are going to respond. If they are not going to respond, growth hormone is of no use. Here, the growth hormone will help us to improve the quality of the and thus decreasing the fragmentation and increasing the success rate of our ART. A quick remark regarding the cryopreservation. Now, since we are saying that it's all the aging or the time spent by that primordial follicle lying in the ovary for a long period of time, if that is going to be the cause for poor oocyte quality and the poor embryo quality, can we think of cryopreserving the ovarian tissue at an younger age and then utilizing it at a later date? It's quite a possibility because of the advances in the vitrification techniques of the oocytes. We have got good vitrification techniques now available, so that our survival rate of oocyte and the success rate of embryos derived from vitrified oocytes are good, and therefore probably cryopreservation would also be a alternative to that. There are many other alternatives. There are few groups from Japan who are working on the stimulating these primordial follicles. So what we see on antral follicle count, or what we analyze by doing AMH, are the oocytes which are in the growing phases. We don't analyze actually the primordial follicles. So can we do something to stimulate these primordial follicles so that they can start the development in the primary and secondary oocyte? That is what is been done by a group of researchers in Japan. They have already done few successful cases, and even a couple of babies have been born of this. But again, all this is in a research phase. Again, stem cells is another way which is coming up in a big way. But till then, this is what we have today in our hand to improve the success of patients with poor ovarian response or diminished ovarian reserve. Thank you so much, Dr. Kiran, once again, and Shield Healthcare for giving me an opportunity. This is my email ID and my phone number. If anyone has got any queries regarding what I have said, you can email me, or you can call me. I'm happy, or I would be glad to have a word with you.
Sir, this is Dr. Kiran. Thank you so much for a very elaborate and
I hope I am in time. Yes, 4:55. So I finished in time.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sir, you covered all these things at a great depth, putting in a balanced set of evidences. So I really appreciate the presentation. I would like to request the audience to take a poll before we go into the Q&A. So Chitra, you can start the poll.
Yes.
This poll has got some important questions. We would like to know your perspective on what do you feel about these, some of the very important things.
So I need to take the poll as well?
Sir, it would be our pleasure, sir.
Okay, I'm not able to vote.
Oh.
So that's fine.
Okay. Yes, sir. Sir, I think we can move into Q&A now. Sir, the first question is, I think you already answered this from Dr. Santosh Kirloskar.
Yes.
Is there any role of stem cells or PRP, sir?
Yes, stem cells is an option which is tried, and there are quite a few group of researchers which are doing work on that. But I would say that it is still in the research phase and has not come up in a big way. It has to be validated. It has to be tried, and till the time good clinical trials come up with the results, it would be difficult for us to say that yes, we should be using stem cells for each and every woman with poor ovarian response.
Thank you, sir. So, doctors, any more questions for sir? You can type in the chat box. I will read it out to sir. Sir, I had a couple of questions with your permission.
Yes.
Sir, you covered DHA at length, but of late there are some interesting studies coming up with the other pathogenesis of poor ovarian reserve, like say a diminished blood supply or mitochondrial. I think you touched upon the mitochondrial aspect as well. So,
Yeah.
in your opinion, sir, what about these other molecules like coenzyme Q10 or say a polycosanol or say a L-arginine? So what would be your opinion on those?
Yeah, coenzyme Q10, yes, that is one. No, because it gives you the ATP. Coenzyme Q10, it gives you the ATP, and because see the concept why CoQ10 is supposed to be working is that, as I said, because of the mitochondrial dysfunction, it's the powerhouse. Energy is supplied to the embryo by the mitochondria. The ATP is reduced because of the mitochondrial dysfunction. Now, CoQ10 helps to increase the ATP and therefore increase the energy source for this oocyte and the embryo, thus improving the quality of the embryo. Ishre has come up, if I'm not wrong, Ishre has come up recently with a newsletter or a communication on different adjuvants, and in that it has said that CoQ10 and growth hormone are the ones which seem to be promising, for future.
Thank you, sir. Any questions, sir, doctors? You can type it in the chat box or.
So if there are no questions, then only two possibilities, that whatever I said was already known to the participants, or I have
Sir, there is one question from
okay, at what FSH levels you would advise to stop medical line of treatment and go for oocyte donor? Maybe I would say that nowadays we are not depending on the FSH levels. We are more into AMH levels, and anything which is less than 0.5, I would prefer to do, and I would go for donor oocyte program. See, finally, it all depends upon what the patient wants. Maybe in our country, because everything comes with a cost. So maybe I would like to, try a few different things on the patient to get her own eggs. But then for that, the patient should be ready to spend that kind of money doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever cycles of IVF are needed. So what happens is, in our country, if I give an option of donor oocyte to the patient, most of the times the woman is ready to go for donor egg. Hello?
Yes, sir. So thank you for the answer. I think well clarified by you, sir.
So I hope if there are no more questions, can we just end the session?
Sure, sir. Sure, sir. So, sir, I would like to thank you on behalf of Shield Healthcare, and also thank the audience for participating in this question, as well as the webinar for logging in the evening when the practice is just beginning. So thank you so much, sir. We hope to have more webinars with you in the future on more interesting topics.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Chaitanya.